progress. Now I want to be clear. With the global challenges we face, from the war in Europe to disruption of supply chains and pandemic shutdowns in Asia, we could face additional headwinds in the months ahead. Our work is far from over, but two things should be clear. First,
So important announcement, everybody, has been made, and the federal government has released what stimulus programs are currently providing Americans with extra stimulus money. So yes, thousands of dollars in financial assistance can actually be claimed by you guys right now. Stimulus checks have been popular among many people facing a crisis and rising inflation. Although the National Bureau of Economic Research has not officially declared a recession, experts have said that an economic downturn of that proportion could likely prompt another round of stimulus. Now, several lawmakers have already begun issuing stimulus checks to residents in response to this skyrocketing inflation, but there is still relief available from President Biden's previous stimulus package. The federal government announced about $10 billion for the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which aims to help homeowners who have fallen behind on their mortgages and other housing expenses because of the crisis to stay at home. Now, the U.S. Treasury Department allocated the money to states to administer their own programs. The good news is that most states still have money left to help homeowners bring their mortgages current or help them pay for insurance, property tax, and neighborhood association dues, depending on the state program rules. In Minnesota, for instance, homeowners may be eligible for as much as $35,000 to be paid toward past due expenses. In New Mexico, the limit is $20,000, but covers help with past due housing costs or current expenses. The relief package passed by Congress in December also included around $25 million to assist low-income tenants and with urgent needs for help with rent. The American Rescue Plan of March 2021 added around $21 billion to the pot, meaning $46.5 billion was set aside for emergency rental assistance. In some states, the rent relief programs have already been administered by counties or local jurisdictions rather than statewide agencies. As of July, $29 billion have been given out, and 68% of the 514 programs nationwide were still accepting applications. And now, swift action should be taken by Congress to help relieve the countless families that are suffering. The state of Indiana is going to return $125 to each Indiana taxpayer after they file their 2022 taxes. This is due to higher than expected state revenue in the state. The state leaders have announced last month that Indiana residents would receive a combined refund worth around $545 million, but they weren't sure at the time how much money each taxpayer would get. Under the law, if Indiana's reserves are 12% of general fund appropriations or higher, exceeding K-12 education reserves, the residents will get some of the money back.
the economic plan is working, and second is building an economy that will reward work. Wages are up this month, provide opportunity, help the middle class, and still have work to do, but we're on track. The second point I want to make is we need to pass the Inflation Reduction Act right away. That's the most consequential thing that Congress can do to keep our progress on inflation from getting better, from getting worse, keep it moving in the right direction. And it will bring down the cost of prescription drugs, health insurance premiums, and energy costs. It's going to make big corporations just pay their fair share, nothing more than their fair share. It's going to reduce the deficit without raising a penny in taxes on people making under.
Consumers' money will reduce their healthcare costs, it will ultimately reduce their energy costs, and it will take the most significant step that we have ever taken to combat climate change. After listening to Chairman McGovern's statement, I have to say that I think that our staffs must have worked together on the statements, because the one that was drafted for me is almost identical to the one that Chairman McGovern gave. So
there's value in repetition.
Well, I'm not one of those who subscribes to the often used congressional theory that everything's been said, but not everybody's said it, so that everybody has to say it. So I'm going to extemporize a little bit and talk about some of the things which we know we're going to hear from Republicans who are, quite frankly, scared to death of what we are about to do, because they know, one, it is incredibly popular and with the American people, and secondly, that it does exactly what the American people want us to do, which is to deal with climate change, to deal with healthcare costs, to deal with energy costs, And all they can do now is use scare tactics to essentially try to cast some doubt on what will be a very meaningful piece of legislation for the American people. I want to start with the question of inflation. We've heard a lot, and as the chairman mentioned, Republicans, and they've done this on the Budget Committee for many, many hearings, love to throw out Larry Summers, who predicted that, among other things, he actually predicted 3 different outcomes from the American Rescue Plan, one of which would lead to inflation. So now they jump on his back and say, oh, Larry Summers said that if you pass the American Rescue Plan, we'd get inflation. Well, there's a little bit of doubt. As a matter of fact, a considerable amount of
prices, I think, could continue to soar. Despite the fact that wage growth is there, people are still losing with an 8.5% inflation print. Does the consumer get scared in the fall, and are we just sort of whistling past the graveyard, as Danny Moses said on Tuesday night?
Well, if inflation stays where it is, it's 8.5% CPI inflation through July. If it stays there, we got a problem, because you're right, wages are rising 5-6% at most. So that means real wages after inflation is declining. It's cutting into people's purchasing power. Now they can manage that for a while because they have a lot of extra savings they built up during the pandemic because they were sheltering in place and not spending, or got a lot of government support. So that helps tide them over. But they can't do that forever. So we do need to see inflation moderate. And that's why these inflation statistics we got on Wednesday and today are really very encouraging, because they signal that we've seen a peak in inflation and inflation's headed in the right direction. But it has to continue to moderate, or otherwise, you're right, by Christmas, we're going to have a problem.
Hey, Mark, it's Jeff Mills. Quick question just relative to sort of this good news is bad news scenario. How do you view what's going on in the labor market? Obviously, good news kind of underpins some of the fundamentals of the economy. But then to your point about inflation, it may embolden the Fed, maybe makes them think they haven't done enough. So how do you square all of that in terms of the impact on the economy and then obviously the markets?
Well, I'm more of a good news kind of guy. I like jobs and creating jobs. And so that's really important. And the strong job numbers we got in July just show you how resilient the economy is, and that it can take a lot. I mean, the pandemic, the Russian invasion, these are massive supply shocks. It's amazing our economy is still standing after suffering these 2 shocks. And the labor market is testimonial to that. Now, job growth needs to slow. Unemployment's 3.5%. We can't see that go any lower. Otherwise, wage and price pressures are going to develop, and the Fed's going to have to respond to that. But I think they'll get their way. And in this coming week, we'll see the reason why. We'll see the softer retail numbers. And most importantly, we'll see those weaker housing statistics. That's the most rate-sensitive sector of the economy, and that's got to lead the slowdown. And I think we'll get a sense of that next week.